So every week in fantasy football on Saturdays, I make sure to go through every single matchup to find the must-start and must-sit running backs for the week of fantasy football. And the reason I do it on Saturday is because it gives us time to get an injury report about every single matchup that is happening over the weekend. And I gotta tell you, this is probably the most important week that I am doing this must-start and sit video because there are tons of injuries and bye weeks that are complicating the running back position specifically. So it's very important. Now we're going through every single matchup today, finding the must-start and must-sit running backs for Week 9 fantasy football, guys. And I'm one of the only fantasy football YouTubers who's working on a Saturday, getting you guys this content. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So let's go ahead and get into the first matchup. Dolphins and Chiefs, they're both playing in Germany this weekend. So the game is at 8:30 a.m. Central on Sunday morning. So make sure to have your lineup set tonight on Saturday night when this video is coming out, because you're likely not going to be awake for this game as soon as it starts and making lineup changes tomorrow morning. So both of these running backs are definitely must start. I mean, with the week of injuries and just with the potential of both of these guys, there's no reason that you should have either Raheem Mostert or Isaiah Pacheco on your bench. They're simply just two high upside options because they both have such high octane offenses attached to them. Isaiah Pacheco coming off a bad week versus Denver, I don't have any reservations starting him this week. That was a bad week for them, and that happens to every single good team in NFL, is they have a bad week. That was a bad week for Kansas City, bad week for Isaiah Pacheco, bad week for all Chiefs fantasy options. So it wasn't, I don't look at that and say that's going to be a mark moving forward. This is a game that I think they're going to rebound in, and Isaiah Pacheco, to me, great fantasy option this week. Raheem Mostert, also a great fantasy option this week because, like I said, with kind of the same thing, which is that both of their workloads are very similar. They're both averaging around 13 carries per game. Raheem Mostert is on the most explosive offense in football. That's the reality here of what we're dealing with when it comes to Raheem Mostert's upside. So his upside is never in question. I don't question it even against a tough Chiefs defense, which is actually 100% true. And I say Jeff Wilson, I still consider him flexible. And I get it, like, he's done nothing since he's come back. The first week he came back, he had like 1 touch, and last week he had 6 touches. So his workload has not been just this outstanding workload. Every week he's getting more and more involved though, and just with the capability of the offense, and especially in a matchup like this where I do think points could be flying in this game, I want to have a lot of options. I'm not saying to play Jeff Wilson. I don't think he's an upper tier starter or flex option. But what I am saying is the matchup is there and the offensive upside is there and the workload is increasing. So he is a flexible option, and then everybody else is irrelevant. Jerick McKinnon's a no-go right now. There's just no volume attached to him. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire is obviously a no-go. Vikings at Falcons here. You're going to continue to start Bijan. I get it. Every week it's completely dependent on what his status is as far as getting in the end zone, because his workload is just not enough and not what it should be. He's not getting 20 opportunities per game like he should be. That's just the fact about the Falcons offense that sucks. But the good thing is the Vikings defense, their weakness is largely in the secondary, but the Falcons offense is without Drake London this week. I think there's going to be more of an emphasis to get the ball in Bijan Robinson's hands this week. And any week, just because of the upside, he's going to be a must-start guy as long as he continues to get at least 12 to 13 carries per game. Alexander Mattison, Tyler Algier, they're both flexible. Alexander Mattison more towards the upper tier just because he still is handling the majority of the touches. We'll get to that in a minute. But like I've consistently said with Alexander Mattison, there's just not much upside here with him. There's just not. It's not good. It's not a good situation one bit. So I hate it. I hate the situation here, while acknowledging that you still can't flex him because he still is seeing specifically targets, which is keeping his value afloat. Tyler Algier, just from a carry perspective, you could flex him if you were really desperate. I don't think he's a good flex option at all. He's a lower tier guy because the reality is he is getting volume, basically the equivalent of Bijan Robinson, but at the same time, he's nowhere near as efficient. The offense is not getting in the end zone much lately, and the matchup is not particularly great. So I don't really love the option, but just from a volume play in a deeper league, or if you got injuries or bye weeks, I can understand the merit here. Cam Akers, I'm on watch this week. I still don't think he's a flexible guy, But I'll tell you this right now, everybody listening to this, I am going to be watching this game specifically for Cam Akers and what his workload is like, because if he continues to get, 10 to 12 opportunities per game, he could soon find himself not only in flex territory, but above Alexander Mattison. I'll be watching this one, but Ty Chandler's a no-go. Bears at Saints here, next matchup. Alvin Kamara, running back one of the week. For me personally, I love the matchup. Kamara's averaging about 30 opportunities per game. He's been efficient with his work. It's absurd what he's doing right now. Guys, finding the end zone basically every week as well. Taking on the Bears. I love the matchup in every sense of the word. You do not put Alvin Kamara on your bench, especially this week. Deonta Foreman, I do consider to be a flexible guy. And actually, I consider him more flexible than Roschon Johnson, because when you look at what Roschon did last week in his return, there's always going to be an ounce of upside here because he sees targets. But Deonta Foreman did handle the majority of the carries last week. And that was also a matchup where they got absolutely crushed. I actually think the Bears are going to keep this one a little bit closer just because the Saints offense is not as efficient as the Chargers offense. That's the reality here. So I do think that the Saints and Bears game will be a little bit closer than people think, while acknowledging I still think the Saints are going to win. But I think just because of the close game factor, I think Deonta Foreman, there's a world against a very, very tough defense that I had inside my top 2 of fantasy defenses this week. I think there's a world where Deonta Foreman could have a mysteriously good week. I'll just put that out there. Roschon Johnson, like I said, I'm not going to play him, and I'm not telling my audience to play him because this offense is just not good enough. There's really not enough room for 2 running backs, and this week I'm taking Deonta Foreman as the guy I'd prefer. And Jamal Williams is a clear second fiddle to Alvin Kamara right now, and Alvin Kamara is just handling the workload for everybody right now. Rams and Packers here. Next matchup, nobody's must start. None of these running backs, I'm confident telling my audience that you guys can play these guys without any questions. But there are 4 flexible options here. And I'll tell you this, every single week in the flex territory category and the start category, the guys are listed in order in accordance with my rankings for the week. So Aaron Jones originally was actually below Darrell Henderson. I actually switched that up because Aaron Jones, I did read a report that Matt LaFleur said he's ready to unleash him versus the Rams. Now, I don't know what unleash means. Maybe he only means giving him 15 opportunities instead of like 10 or 7 that he has been getting. Even if that's the case, I'm automatically intrigued because the Rams defense sucks. That's what makes Aaron Jones a little bit more intriguing this week. He's not an upper tier option. He's more of the middle upper tier. I think he's flexible because of the matchup right here. And I also think he's flexible just because if he gets more opportunities, if he gets more work, there will be better opportunities here for him in a matchup like this. Darrell Henderson, Royce Freeman, they're in very similar situation as well. They're taking on a defense that isn't good, and really they're splitting the backfield. They're basically both handling about 12 to 15 carries per game. I do think that they both can be flexed. I don't think they have great upside, but I do think there's a chance that at least one of them gets in the end zone this week against a weak Packers defense. And A.J. Dillon, lower tier flex option, especially if Aaron Jones sees more volume this week. But just based on the volume he's seen over the past several weeks, I do think he's flexible. And then everybody else is relevant because I mentioned everybody relevant. Commanders at Patriots here. Next matchup. Nobody's a must start. Both offenses are tragically bad. And both running backs, both of them don't split carries, but they both don't get enough volume for me to be considering them must starts. Ramondre Stevenson, I slightly prefer him over Brian Robinson. Very, very slightly, because he sees more target share than Brian Robinson does. Brian Robinson sees like 2 targets a game, if that. That's on the high end. Ramondre Stevenson, he's typically seeing around 4 to 6 targets per game. That's what separates the two for me. They both handle basically the same amount of carries per game at like 12 to 13. So I'll take the guy who has a little bit more target opportunity, and that's going to be Ramondre Stevenson. And actually, I think that this might be a better matchup than I originally thought heading into the week because no more Chase Young, no more Montez Sweat. There could be an opportunity here for Ramondre to get into the end zone this week. But Brian Robinson, I will acknowledge, doesn't have a bad matchup either. That's why he's still flexible as well. The matchup is great. Patriots defense is horrendous. They're absolutely awful without Christian Gonzalez and without Matt Judon. They're a terrible defense here. So Brian Robinson can be flexed just because he handles the majority of the backfield. And then Zeke, Antonio Gibson, not worth messing with. Seahawks at Ravens here. I get it. A lot of people I've had a lot of questions about Kenneth Walker this week. What is the workload going to be like? Can I play Zach Charbonnet? Here's what I'm going to say, and we'll get into Zach Charbonnet in a minute. Kenneth Walker's still a must-start guy. The reason he had the least amount of touches last week than he had all season long was because he came into the week injured. He missed practice time last week. He still played, and he toughed it out, but he wasn't 100%, and the Seahawks wanted to preserve him. So they used more Zach Charbonnet. I'm not saying Zach Charbonnet can't be getting more opportunities on a weekly basis, but in a matchup like this, I'm not starting a guy like Zach Charbonnet because the matchup against the Ravens is already really tough, and if he gets like 6 or 7 opportunities in this game, that's not going to be enough against the Ravens defense. I think Kenneth Walker gets a healthy enough workload, and he's explosive enough as a player to where I think that there's a chance he could break off a big play or two. That's why Kenneth Walker's still in must-start territory. Gus Edwards, very high in flex option this week, and I get it, like, he had a hat trick last week, and that's probably never going to happen again. Like, we've never seen that type of production from Gus Edwards. The reason I actually like Gus Edwards moving forward, a relative amount, is because while he handles basically the same workload every week, which is about 12 to 15 carries, and he doesn't see targets because Lamar doesn't check the ball down, the reason I like him is because he's on an offense that is so efficient, running the ball specifically. Gus Edwards is averaging 4 yards per carry right now, and the offensive line is tremendous. This defense against the Seahawks is not an easy defense to take on, but the Ravens right now, the way they're playing, I think Gus Edwards just being on that offense and being the lead back is definitely going to be in the upper tier flex territory now and moving forward as well. Like I said, Zach Charbonnet, I'm just not telling you guys to do it in this tough of a matchup when I think his workload decreases this week. And Justice Hill is just simply, there's not enough upside there, especially if Gus Edwards is going to play like he did last week. And I expect Gus Edwards to be the lead back again this week. Buccaneers at Saints, next matchup here. This is one of the off weeks that Rachaad White I do consider a must start. Let me tell you why. Number one, everybody's injured or out. I mean, you've got Jaguars on bye, you've got the 49ers on bye, you've got the Lions on bye. There's a lot of bye weeks this week for top-tier running backs that pushes Rachaad White up in my rankings. And then there's also a ton of injuries that we're going to get into right now. Rachaad White, I do consider a must-start because the guy sees lots of targets. In their Week 8 loss against the Buffalo Bills, Rachaad White saw 7 receptions. If he continues to get that type of target share, he's going to be a decent fantasy option just from a volume perspective. Devin Singletary is flexible this week because Dameon Pierce is out. He's not playing in this game. So Devin Singletary, the guy that everybody has already been a little bit on lately, I think this is a week where you can play Devin Singletary. The Buccaneers defense is not a great matchup though. Just remember that. They're a tougher defense, but Devin Singletary is looking like he's going to handle all of the carries in this backfield. So just from a volume perspective, similar to a Gus Edwards, just way less efficient and not on as good of an offense. That's the reason you can start Devin Singletary though. And then everybody else, nobody on the Buccaneers is relevant. Cardinals at Browns here. The next matchup. Jerome Ford is on the border of must start versus flex territory. The reason I say Jerome Ford's must start is because I think that coming into a week like this against the Cardinals, at home, with a good offensive line, against an awful team, I think that the starting running back in this game for the Browns has to be the guy that is in must-start territory. Jerome Ford has been pretty efficient this year. Last week was bad because he was injured. He got plenty of practice time this week. I think he's going to come in healthier, and I think he's going to be looking a lot better this week against this horrific of a team. So I do think Jerome Ford is must-start. Kareem Hunt is definitely flexible, though, because of the way he's been playing. And he's been finding the end zone as well. And the matchup, of course, is very good. I think Kareem Hunt is flexible. Amari DiMercato, he's out. So I had him ranked inside the top 30 running backs this week. He's out. That's no longer. Keontae Ingram is the guy who is apparently going to be handling the workload, which makes him flexible. But just know this, guys. I'm not endorsing you playing Keontae Ingram over Kareem Hunt, or Devin Singletary for that matter. This Cardinals team is a mess. Their backfield's a mess. I don't trust it at all. The only reason he's here in flex territory is because the reports I read say he is going to be the lead guy. I honestly don't trust it very much. And I advise my audience to listen very closely because I'm not telling you to play him over a guy like Kareem Hunt or Devin Singletary this week. Colts and Panthers here. The next matchup, Jonathan Taylor, Zach Moss. I think they're both must starts at this point. Jonathan Taylor for the obvious reasons. His workload continues to increase, and he's starting to look really, really good again. Big plays are back. Offense is super efficient, and the matchup is very good. Jonathan Taylor, for the obvious reason, is a must start. But Zach Moss is a must start right now as well. The guy has simply been too excellent with every single opportunity he's had this year. I can't continue to say that, yeah, he's this unstable option, which, like, from a workload perspective and from a investment perspective, I would consider him still to be an unstable option, which is what made Zach Moss such a tough option for me all year. But at this point, guys, in this type of matchup with what he's been doing over the course of the season, I can't tell you guys this is an unstable option. I would play him this week personally. I think he's a must-start option. Chuba Hubbard. Reports are the Panthers are benching Miles Sanders. He's the backup this week. Chuba Hubbard's the guy. Chuba Hubbard's going to handle the carries, and he's been handling like 15 to 18 carries per game. But don't read too much into this, guys. The Panthers' offense still sucks. They're just not very good. So I don't care who the running back is. Neither of them have much upside. But I do think there's just from a volume perspective, similar to a Devin Singletary, is going to be flexible in this matchup. And then, of course, you sit Miles Sanders because, like I said, he's the backup right now. And he's looked absolutely horrendous. Giants at Raiders here. You start both of these guys. Saquon Barkley is the entire Giants offense. I've said this for weeks now. They threw for 10 passing yards last week in week 8 against the Jets. Awful. You cannot trust any other option on this offense, and especially since Darren Waller is out. Darren Waller's out this week. This offense is 100% run through Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones back as well. You can never bench Saquon Barkley just because he's 100% of this Giants offense. And then Josh Jacobs in a good matchup. I'm going to play Josh Jacobs, continue to play him, even though the Raiders are a complete mess right now. Josh Jacobs gets the volume. He sees targets in a matchup that's good. I'm going to play Josh Jacobs. Nobody else is relevant in this matchup. Cowboys at Eagles, one of the best matchups of the week. And again, you start both of these guys. You start Tony Pollard, you start DeAndre Swift. The matchup upside is simply too high. Both of these teams easily could score 25 to 30 plus points. Easily. I think that Tony Pollard, as disappointing as he's been over the past several weeks, this could be a good game for him because the reality is Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, I think they're probably going to be the main focus of the Eagles this week and shutting that down. I think Tony Pollard is going to have a good week, and you just don't put Tony Pollard on your bench either way because the Cowboys' offense is capable. So you don't put Tony Pollard on your bench. DeAndre Swift, you don't put him on your bench either. Dude is just so efficient with every touch he gets, and he's typically seeing anywhere from 12 to 18 opportunities per game. DeAndre Swift, to me, even in a tough matchup against the Cowboys, never goes on your bench because the Eagles' offensive line is absolutely tremendous, and this team as a whole is absolutely tremendous as well, which leads to massive efficiency numbers for DeAndre Swift, and nobody else is relevant in this matchup again. Bills at Bengals, the Sunday night game. Cannot wait for this game. But we have a problem at the running back position. Joe Mixon, I originally was really big on him this week. He's questionable heading into this game. And for those of you who've been watching my channel for a long time, you know how much I absolutely hate when there's a player on a Sunday or Monday night game with a questionable tag. Watch this one develop throughout the day. If we get any news on Saturday night or Sunday morning, one way or the other, we will act accordingly. If Joe Mixon, reports are that he's leaning towards playing, put him in your lineup. If the reports are leaning that he's a 50-50 game time call, that worries me. That's a huge problem. We're just going to have to monitor this one. But if he does play, I'm big on Joe Mixon this week, even in what is perceived and on paper to be a tough matchup. Bengals offense is humming right now. James Cook is still must start. In this type of matchup with this type of scoring upside, James Cook is efficient and he still is the lead back. So I'm going to be playing James Cook. And Travion Williams is in flex territory in the case of Joe Mixon. And I do believe that if Joe Mixon doesn't play, I think Travion Williams is flexible. Not must start, flexible. More of a middle tier to low tier option. Latavius Murray, I'm not playing. There's just not enough upside here. He's not efficient enough. And I'd rather have James Cook on my lineup than taking a deep shot for someone who doesn't have much upside in the flex position, which is exactly how I feel about Latavius Murray. Last matchup of the week, Chargers at Jets. On Monday night, you start both of them. Austin Eckler came back, had a great week last week, as I predicted. The dudes must start always. You never put Austin Eckler on your bench. And then Breece Hall must start right now. Good matchup against the Chargers, although they are good against the run. Breece Hall is involved in the pass, and the guy is simply just too much of a big play threat for you to put on your bench at this point. They're not messing around with Dalvin Cook anymore, which is what makes Breece Hall so valuable in fantasy football now, and especially with all the injuries and bye weeks, Breece Hall is a top 5 option for me this week, and everybody else is irrelevant. So let me know what questions you need answered for Week 9 fantasy football in the comments below. And if you want to see the must start and sit defenses for Week 9 fantasy football, click on this video right here.